Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Chinese Cultural Center. Wonderful to see such a full house. Thank you all for your patience as we all fill in, and a good afternoon to everyone who's outside. There are many people, because it's so full, who are outside in the courtyard and the streets around us. There is a big screen at Kiefer in Columbia that is broadcasting the live action here from inside, but we're so thankful so many have joined and so many are watching from outside and participating in this very important day. Welcome to the special council meeting, Sunday, April the 22nd, 2018. First, we acknowledge we are on the unceded homelands of the MUSQUEAM, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and we give thanks for their hospitality and generosity on their lands and waters. So as we begin our formal proceedings of today's special council meeting, I would like to invite MUSQUEAM Elder Larry Grant to provide a host nation welcome. Please give Larry a warm welcome.
Ni hao ma.
Ni hao ma.
I te William. When an ait tinish walawan gunti gosnala I Assam kwas hilokstala te mukt te net zaumo kwas ko I te sanstamo kwas ko MUSQUEAM. Te gwenes je winners ke palanoch I choltimultuch zette sam ten ni te swala I hilokstala hai tepe was siamp nasye. I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you for the mayor and council for inviting me to be here this afternoon. As our ancestor did, Keopolanoch and Cuauhtémoc, who were here to greet the first Spanish ship under Captain Narvaez and the first ship under Captain George Vancouver. I raise my hands and welcome as our ancestors did in the past.
We'll start with just some brief remarks in opening before we guide into the business of today's meeting. The City of Vancouver has traditionally held special council meetings to deal with emerging issues. However, the need for today's event has been apparent ever since Vancouver held its very first council meeting back in 1886. At that meeting, one of the first laws passed was to deny people of certain communities, including those of Chinese descent, the right to vote. They were also denied the right to run for public office, denied the right to study for and to enter certain official positions, and denied the right from owning properties in some areas of the city. They were completely and utterly disenfranchised at the first city council meeting in the City of Vancouver's history. And since that day, until World War II, many motions were debated in council and passed that systematically attempted to deny the opportunity for those of Chinese descent to grow and flourish in our city. Despite those attempts to diminish and repress, the economic, social, and cultural fabric of our city have been undeniably strengthened by the threads of contributions and the courage of the community. They rose and still rise. Now, as you can see, we are translating this entire event into Cantonese to ensure that it's as accessible as possible. Today, we have the honor of having Fenella Sung provide the interpretations. A big thank you to Fenella. Ms. Sung is a certified translator specializing in legal and government fields and a veteran of the Society of the member of the Society of the Translators and Interpreters of BC, where she also served as past president of the board. So thank you, Fenella. We are also joined by two honorary members of the Historical Discrimination Against Chinese People Advisory Group reading with us. And first is Bill Yi. And Bill Yi is a lawyer and the first Chinese Canadian elected as a Vancouver City Council member. He was a city councillor from 1982 until 1986, and Bill was appointed as a provincial court judge in 1999 and retired in 2015. Thank you and welcome to Bill. And our second honorary member of the advisory group joining us is Maggie Ip. And Maggie was a secondary school teacher and a Vancouver City Councillor between 1993 and 1996. And she is also the founding chair of the social service organization Success. Welcome and thank you, Maggie. And as Fenella just said, today's apology will be read in English and in the Chinese dialects of Cantonese and Say Up. To honor, Bill gets the honor of doing Say Up. He will try. To honor the language spoken in the communities who were most impacted by the discriminatory policies over those dark decades. For the first half of the City of Vancouver's history, racial prejudice and discrimination against our Chinese Canadian residents was commonplace. And yet, for those 60 years, rather than standing up against the injustice of racism, many of our elected officials, including mayors and councillors, used the legal power of the city to enact and expand laws targeting Chinese residents. Through council motions and through the everyday effects of bylaws, licenses, and legalized racism, the Chinese community of Vancouver suffered the awful consequences of lawful discrimination. I rise today as the Mayor of Vancouver to recognize and to take responsibility for the suffering and indignity endured because of this historical injustice. The depth and breadth of the actions for which we apologize today are deep. From the first moments of our incorporation as a city on April the 6th, 1886, Vancouver took away the legal right for the Chinese community to vote. The minutes of the first council meeting had the following, and I quote, "No Chinaman or Indian shall be entitled to vote in any municipal election for the election of a mayor or alderman," unquote. Full voting rights, a cornerstone of our democracy, were not granted to Chinese Canadians in Vancouver until 1949. The City of Vancouver lobbied the federal government to pass racially discriminatory immigration policies, including the Chinese Immigration Act of 1923, which formally excluded Chinese people from immigrating to Canada. For the next 25 years, fewer than 100 Chinese immigrants were legally allowed to enter Canada, splintering families and creating unspeakable suffering within Vancouver's Chinese community. Through its contracts and grants, the City of Vancouver excluded people of Chinese heritage from being employed by the city or by those doing business with the city. No Chinese person was employed by the City of Vancouver until 1952. Numerous measures were taken to segregate the areas where Chinese residents were able to live and earn a livelihood. City bylaws were restricted where Chinese people could own and run businesses. Housing covenants were used to prohibit Chinese residents from purchasing property. Although these clauses are no longer legally enforceable, many remain even today on legal titles, a reminder of how racial segregation in housing and business shaped our city's neighborhoods and communities. The elected officials of the City of Vancouver used their role as leaders to sow the seeds of intolerance that emboldened individuals and groups to act upon anti-Asian discrimination, whether by explicitly encouraging anti-Chinese sentiments or by silently allowing racial hatred and violence to continue. Too many of our predecessors stood by rather than stood up to racism. I rise today to recognize and repudiate such acts that stigmatized and dehumanized the Chinese Canadian community of Vancouver. I rise today to formally apologize to the Chinese community of Vancouver and to all Canadians of Chinese ancestry for the discriminatory legislation directed against Chinese people in Vancouver by its elected officials and civil servants from 1886 until 1949. On this day, on behalf of City Council and the City of Vancouver, I sincerely apologize for these past injustices and their cruel effects on individuals and their families. and commit to ensuring that similar unjust practices are never again allowed to fall on any group or community. I rise today to acknowledge the darkness and suffering that anti-Chinese policies and legislation caused, and to vow that never again will Mayor and Council stand aside in the face of racism. We will stand up to those who would use racial discrimination to divide us, and we vow each and every day to challenge and combat intolerance, and to be vigilant against the rise of prejudice and discrimination. This is our responsibility in the light of our dark history. This we owe today and tomorrow to those who suffered the effects of the legalized discrimination of yesterday. This debt of shame incurred in our past, we pay forward so that no citizen of Vancouver will ever suffer again the indignity of racism and prejudice.
安然見滅，承認安定嘅排華語政策和法例所遏制嘅嚴暗而相控。我列晒時將而是議員，我愛解命庭為種族歧視是永遠唔代為吊銷旁觀。另外，興善會抗另一企圖用種族歧視來換隔外呢年。並列晒每日為慶，都為歧視行為展開挑戰和對抗，以及時刻堅定而防止偏見而歧視對象。由於這案黑暗嘅歷史，我要義務背起這光明正大嘅責任，我今日明日及未來，會改為那些過去承受合法歧視影響嘅人承擔責任，亦同時亦對呢條這比過去所欠嘅羞辱嘅債作出行動，才可以再換句話句面，永遠唔再因種族歧視和歧視而受屈辱。
Today, Vancouver is a diverse city with a global reputation for celebrating our cultural differences. Our city's reputation is not merely symbolic. It lives each day in the deeds of individual citizens and civic employees who treat their fellow citizens, including our newest arrivals, with respect and acceptance. The city of Vancouver owes much to the Chinese community and to all immigrant communities. Along with our First Nations and urban Indigenous communities, many have unfairly had to struggle to overcome racism and discrimination, and through their actions have made our city more just and fair. The struggle to make Vancouver an inclusive, resilient, and vibrant city will continue. We recognize that even during the darkest days of racial discrimination and prejudice, there were many of those who were brave enough to stand up against injustice. And through such everyday acts of firmness and resolve, our city has become a better place and will continue to become a better place for all of our citizens. Let us all rise in defense of the principles of equity, inclusion, and equal access for which we stand today and in all the days to come. What does an apology mean? Apologizing to a community for past injustices is a reconciliation process. And this process allows the community to learn from the mistakes of previous generations, and in doing so, consolidate and embrace our firm beliefs and values of being a just and inclusive community. We recognize that attitudes and biases can run deep. Learning from these past mistakes is a humble step and a reminder of ever-present challenges. Through the process of reconciliation, we consolidate and embrace our firm beliefs and values of being an inclusive community, one that embraces our collective human rights and prepares us to be proactive in preventing discrimination. To ensure that this official apology is not confined to being simply words on paper, the City of Vancouver has adopted actions that would give life and sustenance to this apology. Not simply to repair past wrongdoings or to prevent injustice, but to prevent injustice from ever occurring again. On November the 1st, 2017, City Council approved a set of actions that will move Vancouver forward towards a future of reconciliation. The first, which is being delivered today, was to acknowledge past discrimination and offer a formal apology in the community. The city will also strive to strengthen relations with the Chinese Canadian community through legacy actions, including initiating and sustaining a legacy working group to oversee the implementation of this set of actions, education and outreach to all Vancouver residents to ensure that the wrongdoings of the past are remembered and used as a basis for new learnings on cultural competency and anti-racism dialogues, conserving, commemorating, and enhancing the living heritage and cultural assets of the community with a specific focus on Chinatown, and that's through pursuing a UNESCO designation of World Heritage Site for Chinatown, and creating a Chinatown Living Heritage and Cultural Assets Management Plan to support the UNESCO process, and finally supporting a redesign of the Kiefer Memorial Square. That is the formal apology that is before Council, and with translation, as well as their commitment to the actions going forward. And I just, along with thanking Bill and Maggie, want to thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon, inside and out, and how much we look forward to building on today's announcement into the future. And I would now like to introduce Councillor Raymond Louie, who has been spearheading this initiative from the very beginning, to introduce our three community responders. Councillor Louie.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Lieutenant Colonel Chu George Ng, who was born in Victoria and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1955. In 1958, he was selected to attend St. Mary's University in Halifax, where he graduated with degrees in mathematics and physics. Later, he graduated from George Washington University in the United States with an MBA degree. In 1974, after returning to duties at the National Defense Headquarters in Canada, he was posted as the commanding officer of the Communications Group in Germany, where he was responsible for communications and electronics services for Canadian Forces operations in Europe. Later, he served as the first Canadian Forces European Sports Commissioner. Continuing his military service, Lieutenant Colonel Ng was posted to Europe again in 1980 with NATO. In 1984, he returned to Canada to become a base administration officer at Canadian Bases Force Chilliwack. For his service, Lieutenant Colonel Ng received both the Queen's Silver Jubilee Medal and the NATO Decoration. After retiring from Canadian Forces, he became a project manager as well as working in the banking sector. Lieutenant Colonel Ng is married with 2 sons and helped raise a granddaughter. He is active in the community and has volunteered for many local and national organizations, including Pacific Unit 280 and the Chinese Military Museum. Lieutenant Colonel, please.
Many of you would have heard of a story of a group of young Chinese Canadians meeting at a local church here in Vancouver, Chinatown, at the start of World War II. And these were Chinese Canadians that were born in Canada. These young men were debating whether they should volunteer for the war effort. They realized they did not have the privilege of citizenship as other people did, and they could not vote. They could not join many of the professions. They could not become a lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, or a teacher. They could not use the local swimming pool. Going to the theater meant sitting in the back rows. Government jobs were denied them. They lived segregated lives in Vancouver, Chinatown. After a long debate, the group decided to volunteer for military service to fight for Canada and prove that they were worthy Canadians. Many tried to enlist, but were rejected because they were Chinese. Can you imagine going to a recruiting office, volunteering to fight for Canada that did not provide you all the rights, to offer your life for your country that you lived in, and being rejected? By the end of World War II, however, approximately 600 Chinese Canadian men and women had served in the Canadian forces, and they served extremely well. Their outstanding performances and the many medals and awards earned attest to their bravery and their competence. Some lost their lives in the conflict and never returned. Those that did survive and returned home took up the fight for the right to vote. In May 47, this fight was successful, and Chinese Canadians secured Canadian voting rights. Ladies and gentlemen, we only have with us today about 14 World War II veterans. Now, we have a few of them with us today. Will the World War II vets present please stand? All are over 90. Our oldest veteran is Thomas Wong. He's 101 and not able to join us today. But Ron Lee is with us, the next oldest. Ron, please stand up. He is only 99. The veterans are proud of their military service and records, their role in championing for our rights, and their role in confronting and overcoming discrimination. Although they faced a lot of prejudice both before and after the war, during their time in the service, they were treated as equals. They were instrumental in proving that Chinese Canadians are worthy, loyal, and patriotic Canadians. They are proud they were able to pave the way for following generations. We owe them a tremendous debt.
Today, the C.B.A. continues to focus its activities on the challenging needs and changing needs of the community, including the creation of a non-profit society to provide low-cost housing, frequent fundraising campaigns to assist victims of natural disasters in Canada and China, and organizing annual community celebrations, including events such as the Lunar New Year Parade, Canada Day celebrations, Remembrance Day ceremony, and last year the C.B.A. organized a photo exhibit to celebrate Canada's 150th birthday. Mr. Hilbert is the current president of the C.B.A. As a community leader of over 20 years, Mr. Yu works tirelessly to serve the Chinese community in Vancouver, promoting Chinese culture and building bridges with other communities in Canada and with China. He is also the past president of the Vancouver Chinese Freemason Society. Mr. Yu is also a respected martial artist and has taught many local young people who have gone on to win local, national, and world championships in sports.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Chinese Benevolent Association and its member groups, I would like to acknowledge the city's apology. The federal and provincial governments have both apologized for the past discrimination towards Chinese. The city apologized officially recognized previous Vancouver councils played a big part in discrimination against the Chinese between 1886 and 1947. It is hard to imagine, in today's context, the sufferings endured by early Chinese, but the impact of family separations, economic hardships, and social isolations is still deeply felt by their descendants. Today, the descendants of early immigrants and integrated members of society and are making huge contributions to a society that didn't want to welcome their ancestors. In 1982, BE became the first Chinese Canadian elected to Vancouver councils. Since then, many more Chinese Canadians have been elected to City Council. This formal apology is a very important milestone. It is so that discrimination of any kind has no place in Vancouver's future and present. It raises awareness of racism and celebrates a city that recognizes equality, fairness, inclusion, and diversity as basic principle conduct. I applaud the City of Vancouver to doing this. As we all remember the hardships suffered by early immigrants, let us also acknowledge what new immigrants have brought to this city. They brought with them talents, global outlook, business know-how, and overseas connections. They help to create jobs for themselves and others. They are fully engaged in the social, economic, and cultural for this city. Unlike the past, let us now welcome all newcomers to the city and to treat them with respect and acceptance. One of the city recommendations to apply for Vancouver Chinatown to be designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The C.B.A. and its member organizations pledge to work closely with city in this process. We cannot undo historical injustice, but let us make sure that we do not repeat this. Thank you.
Thank you, President Yu, and thank you to the C.B.A. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Melody B. Choi. Born and raised in Vancouver, Ms. Choi is 17 years old, is a fifth-generation grade 11 student in Vancouver. She excels in drama and choir and volunteers in daycare and children's programs. Outside of school, Ms. Choi is an award-winning TV and film actress and competitive dancer, and she was invited as a speaker at the Paralympic opening ceremonies. Ms. Choi and her family have strong ties in Chinatown. Her great-grandfather, Bak Lang Liu, came to Vancouver in 1912 and had to pay the head tax. Despite this, he ran a successful business at Main and Pender, where they sold quality handmade logging boots. Ms. Choi's grandfather, Jack Chow, was a well-established, successful insurance business operating for over 56 years in Chinatown.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melody Choi, and I'm honored and excited to have been asked to speak at this important meeting today. I'm a proud resident in Vancouver, one of the most progressive cities in the world. As a Chinese Canadian, I am very proud of my rich cultural heritage. In the years to come, I expect to experience endless opportunities in life. However, I need to remember, recognize, appreciate, and respect all those before me who have fought and sacrificed themselves to build a stronger foundation for us to be able to have these opportunities today. While I was aware of some of the historical discrimination against Chinese Canadians, hearing very personal stories from people around me really deepened my appreciation for the impact they have had on my life. I am very grateful to the veterans who faced discrimination, took action against it, fought to help win the war for Canada, and then returned home to successfully fight for the right to vote. The previous generations have paved the way for my generation to value diversity and acceptance. I am fortunate to experience this every day in school and my community. My hope for the future is that the community will continue to support family legacies and encourage advancement through education. As society evolves, maintaining a social environment that is fair and just is an achievable goal. As a fifth-generation Chinese Canadian, I can sincerely express my deepest gratitude to all those who have laid the foundations for me to live my life now with the liberties and rights that were denied to those before me. The hardships and discrimination endured by previous generations should be things of the past. Our lives, my life, is better because of them. I feel that my life choices are unlimited. Unlike Chinese Canadians of the past, I can be judged by who I am and what I can do, and not by my race. For this, I will always be grateful. To close, I'd like to thank the Mayor and Council for their acknowledgement and respect to the past, the Community Advisory Group that worked so hard to make today possible, and for honoring me with the opportunity to share youth's aspirations for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Louie and for everyone for coming today. In many ways, this apology is an apology to my grandparents. My grandparents arrived in Vancouver in about 1895 during the dying days of the Qing dynasty. They landed in Vancouver after looking at many different cities. So I thought about what would my grandfather and grandmother actually say about this apology, and they would have smiled, I think, if they were alive and said, any country, any province, or any city that could look itself in the eye and said, we made a mistake and we're sorry for it, has got to be the best place in the world to live. I also, on behalf of my grandparents and my parents who suffered a lot of the discrimination that we've talked about, not me so much, but I know my parents and grandparents had always thanked the ordinary Vancouverite, the ordinary person who didn't care what color they were and to help them make their lives better. One of them was, of course, the landlord who rented my parents their first apartment. She didn't care what color they were. She just said, pay the rent on time and you can have the place. Good stuff. My grandfather was a tailor, and he had a number of clients. Some were big wigs, and these clients saw my grandfather and his family for what they were, just ordinary, honest, hardworking Vancouverites. And so he helped my uncle get into medical school, one of the very first physicians in Canada at McGill. My father was always very thankful. So those working guys on the line, he was a plumber in his trade union who made sure he had the chance at getting every one of those jobs like everybody else. That was very important. And I'm looking around and I see some of my parents' friends and relatives. I see some of the people I went to high school with, and there's Ian Upton there. And in my day, nobody said you can't hang out with us because you're Chinese. They didn't care. And that's great. And so really, I also just want to say, for my kids, when they were little and running around their neighborhood causing trouble, the neighbors didn't care what color they were. They treated them like any other kid. They chased them out of their yards, threw them out, but also invited them in for ice cream. And so one of the best things about this apology, one of the best things about the city, province, and country is that nobody sees me just as a Chinese guy. or my family as just Chinese, but as just ordinary people. So I want to thank all of you and all those people who work so hard to end discrimination in our country, from the activists, from the politicians, straight down to the landlord who let my parents live where they wanted to live. A deep, heartfelt thank you on behalf of the Jang and Chu family. Thank you.
Councillor Louie.
Well, today, as we turn the page on this part of Vancouver's history and officially apologize to the Chinese Canadian community, I am thankful that I played a small role in making this happen through a council motion and initiated this journey. I am also thankful to this council, Mayor Robertson and previous council, which included Councillor Tony Tang and Councillor Jeff Meggs when we started this, and to the dedicated volunteers on our Historical Discrimination Committee. And a special thank you to our staff, to Wendy Au and Baldwin Wong. Too often our staff are forgotten. Tremendous work is done on behalf of all of you, from these people, these volunteers and staff, and it is important as we recognize this discrimination that had passed and apologize for it, to also recognize the tremendous work that had gone into making this today happen. But most important is also to thank the many Chinese that came before us, the people that suffered and endured many challenges, but kept the belief that this Canada, this Vancouver, had not only room for them, but they also belonged. I want to give a special thank you to the veterans and the seniors. You see them up front today. I know we pointed out the oldest one, 99 years old. I know that Tommy's also here, Monty's here. Tommy's, if not the oldest, is the most cantankerous one. He's often given me a few lessons on what to do. So let's not give in to fear, nor the differences, nor the color of our skin. I am hopeful today. Together, we will overcome and accomplish much more. Thank you.
So just a few closing remarks. Thanks to Council and thanks to all of you councillors uncharacteristically opting not to speak, for being here to witness and give community voice. We appreciate that very much. And I'd like to give, again, a very special thanks to our speakers from the community, to you who've stepped up to represent generations here in the community. Again, to Fenella and to Bill and to Maggie for your translations here as well. To our hosts, the Chinese Cultural Center, hosting us today in this great place. And to the HDC advisory members. It was a big team of people who have pulled all of this together over several years, working in concert, and a big thanks to the community groups, the sponsors, and the partners who have worked hard to make this all possible. As Raymond said, a big thank you to our staff who worked very hard on this as well, and I just also want to acknowledge our Assistant City Manager, Wendy Au, who is retiring this spring as well. Thank you for your incredible career. Wendy, you have been an incredible leader, both at the city and representing the community as well, and bringing all of these worlds together. And what a fitting, amazing event as a closing chapter of your great career at City Hall and with the community. And we wish you all the best in your future endeavors and adventures and going forward. Thank you, Wendy. So I also want to acknowledge, I believe this is a new record at a meeting of Vancouver City Council of elected officials from other levels of government. So I want to acknowledge all of the members of Vancouver's Park Board, the members of Vancouver's School Board. We have members of our federal parliament, members of our provincial legislature, and cabinet ministers as well. And just so everyone knows how many of you there are, if you would all stand, thank you for being witness to this important time.
我哋好多謝我哋嘅民選議員，包括我哋嘅國會議員，包括我哋嘅省議員，同埋溫哥華公園局同埋溫哥華教育局嘅民選議員，多謝佢哋。
Thank you for making the time to be here and bear witness as well. And I just finally like to mention that the City of Vancouver and UBC are working together, have worked on this commemorative book called The Journeys of Hope. And we are excited to be launching it here today, along with many of the other actions going forward and that focus on the UNESCO World Heritage Site for Chinatown. This is an important marker of our time giving this apology and recommitting ourselves to the work, stitching our communities together even closer. So please enjoy the rest of the day. Don't forget the Chinatown Cultural Day events are continuing for the next couple hours until 5 p.m. There are lots of activities around us in the community to enjoy, and a big thanks to all the community groups who've made that possible and are welcoming us and celebrating Chinese culture here. So that is what we have for business today. 多謝各位，謝謝大家。And